All right. So I'll be talking now a little bit about adjusting to a new culture and learning a little bit about Canadian culture. So for some of you, you may be feeling like this right now, right? Campus might feel a little big right now. You can't find your way. It seems like a maze. If you try and find our office, you might feel that way. But I hope that soon you'll feel like this is your home. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what that process looks like of adjusting to a new culture. So how many of you have heard of the W culture or the W curve? Just a couple. So this is kind of a theoretical system of kind of the process of what it looks like being in a new culture, the process that you'll go through. It's obviously not as straightforward as this, right? But there's different stages to adjusting to a new culture. And when you go back home, you're going to experience that again, right? Because you've grown and learned new things, and you're going back home and changing cultures again. So the first stage of that is the honeymoon stage. Everything is exciting, it's new, you're exploring. It all looks a little bit more fun. You know, you're maybe this is your first time seeing the snow, but everything is new and exciting. That stage for some of you will be a short stage. For some of you, maybe exchange students, that might be a little bit longer because you're here, you're traveling and doing a bit more. But that stage can last, for some people, it might just be one day because winter is a bit of a shock, especially if you're starting here in January, or it could last a few months, okay? And then you start to notice those differences in cultures and the way that people do things. You start to get a little bit irritated by them, and a little bit of frustration starts to set in. And the fun thing about Canada is that we're a multicultural country. So it's not a standard way of doing things for everybody because we all come with our different cultural backgrounds and do things a little bit different. So you start to notice these differences, you know, but it's okay. You're still curious, you're still learning. But maybe, you know, it's February, exams, midterm season, you're starting to get stressed with school. Sometimes that's when you start to experience what you hear as being called culture shock or cultural dissonance. This is when you might feel really homesick, depressed, helpless. As Kamaljeet said, you know, you might be crying one day, you might be happy the next day, you might be crying a lot, missing family and home. It's normal. It's a normal part of the process to miss your home, to miss the way of doing things where things are just easy, right? It's a lot harder. You're having to speak English 24/7. Maybe you're not used to that. That's exhausting, right? You might keep making mistakes in interacting with people, and it just kind of kicks in after a while. So if you're experiencing that, know it's normal and you're not alone. And that's what our team is here to talk to you about, as well as our counseling team at the university. Talk to others, talk to your friends, you have a great room here of people that might be experiencing the same things and help each other out. This stage can be quick. It can be, for some people, it will be less severe. For some people, it will be more severe. It just depends on your personal situation. But it does get better. And that's what you need to remember. It does get better, okay? These are just some quotes from some of our international students in the past on their experience. And so one described it as, when I was new to Canada, I was like a newborn, experiencing all these things for the first time. After 4 months, I learned to walk. I thought it would be easy to survive in a foreign country since I always relied on myself and was confident about my abilities, but I was wrong. I did everything with caution to prevent embarrassing mistakes. So again, this is normal. These challenges are normal. And it's part of that cross-cultural experience. It's what we do with those challenges and what we learn from them. Okay, so some signs to keep an eye out for, some possible signs that you're dealing with culture shock or homesickness. You might be feeling sad and depressed for longer periods of time. You might be more irritable, crying often, having a lot of mood swings. Maybe you're feeling very isolated and lonely. You might not be able to concentrate with your classes or school. Your eating and sleeping patterns might change. Maybe you're sleeping and eating too much or not enough, or you're not able to at all. Your stomach not feeling well, food's very different here, right? So your stomach might be upset. You might start to really negatively stereotype the culture, the Canadian culture and Canadian people. You might drink or use drugs more excessively than you normally would. You get a lot of headaches, you're bored, and you start to withdraw. You start to maybe not go to classes or not go out when people invite you. Those are all signs of culture shock. And so it's important to know what are those signs to say, hey, I need to go and talk to somebody, right? Like something's not feeling right, something's not going right, but know that you aren't alone and that is normal. That is a normal part of the process. And then things start to get better with a little help of a friend. You start to work your way through that culture shock and you begin to adapt to the Canadian culture. You start to go out and exploring the city, exploring Canada. You start to participate in Canadian culture and traditions like pumpkin carving, for example, for Halloween, building a snowman, playing in the snow, doing those things. So staying connected is incredibly important. But as Kamaljeet said, you know, it took her 19 years to get adjusted to her own culture. Don't expect to have a best friend in a month, right? It took you 19 years to have a best friend and to have those really strong connections. It takes time, but get out there, meet people. When you're sitting in classroom, don't just look at your phone because that's the easy thing to do, right? It's the comfortable thing. I'm just gonna look through Instagram, look through my phone. Get off your phone, turn around, talk to the person next to you. Weather is always the safe topic. It always changes. It's never the same. Stay in touch with your family is also important. And connecting with your cultural and spiritual community here on campus or in London is also important, right? Because we all miss home and we all need a little bit of that. So don't pressure yourself and say, I must make a Canadian friend, or I'm only going to connect with people from my country. Do a little bit of both. But we have the world here also, right? That's the beauty of Canada. Don't focus on where people are from. Focus on finding people who you can connect with, where you have something similar with. Okay, so it's important to have a combination of those things, right? So have people you can talk to that understand you, that are from the same country, same culture, same spiritual community maybe. Having your Canadian and international friends, and staying connected with your family back home. All three are very important. Understanding the stages of cultural adjustment like we were talking about today. Eating healthy, getting sleep, exercising, and getting sunshine. Sunshine is important, or getting vitamin D is important at this time of the year, right? But making sure you get lots of sleep, making sure that you're eating healthy, getting some fruits and vegetables in is important, right? And exercising. And exercising doesn't mean you have to go to the gym and do a whole class, right? It can be taking a walk around campus. I do that. I consciously sometimes don't buy my lunch so that it forces me to go out and go for a walk, right? So whatever you need to do to move your body is really important. Continue to learn about Canadian culture and participating in it. And avoid making assumptions. What you see on TV isn't the reality of what Canadian culture is. And a lot of what you see is US culture on TV, which is slightly different from Canadian culture. But stay curious, open-minded, and ask questions. And ask for help and support. In Canada, we have a culture of asking for support and help. You're seen as being somebody as strong for asking for help. I know in many other cultures, you're not supposed to ask for help, right? And it's important to understand when you're asking for help what that means in Canada, because I find a lot of international students have a different expectation of what helping is. So in many countries, when you ask for help, it means you're going to do this for me. In Canada, that's not what help means. In Canada, what it means is we'll show you how to do it, we'll give you the information, but you're going to do it yourself. Share your experiences, good and bad. We want to hear about your trips. We want to hear about the things that you've discovered. We want to hear about the good things, but we're also here to help you when you're not having a good day, right? So whether it's us, whether it's our peer guides or English conversation facilitators, our volunteers, your professors, our counseling and health staff, we are here to support you and help and listen. It also helps to keep a journal or a blog or documenting it with pictures on your Instagram account, whatever it may be. For me, it helps me to go around and take pictures because it helps change my perspective, because now I'm looking for something that's beautiful. But document your experience. What have you found different? Write about it. Talk to your family about it. And be patient with yourself, as Kamaljit said, right? It's not going to be an instant thing. I've been here for 20 years and there's still things about Canadian culture that I'm learning every day. It's not an automatic thing. Be patient. It takes time. You're going to have good days. You're going to have bad days. It's normal. This is some advice from some of our volunteers and other international and Western students. So as we've said, get involved on campus. The great thing about Western is that Western is a very campus-oriented university. Students like to stay on campus and be involved, whether it is working part-time here, joining clubs. There's over 100 different clubs, from everything from cultural clubs to sports clubs to special interests to academic clubs. Whatever you're interested in, you'll probably find a club. Volunteer, get involved on student council. There's lots of different ways to get involved. Don't be afraid to express and share your culture and identities with the communities. We want to learn from you too. We want to know about your culture and your traditions. So don't be afraid to share that. Ask for help, as I said. Reach out, ask questions in class. Many professors have office hours. Go to their office hours and ask questions if you don't understand something from the lectures. Try the Spoke bagels. Has anybody heard about the bagels and Rick McGee? No? 2 Western traditions. So there's a restaurant in UCC called the Spoke, and they're famous for their bagels. So that was the bread that you had this morning. They're famous for their bagel sandwiches. And Rick McGee is a singer, and he's like, I don't know, how old is Rick McGee? 80, I don't know. He's been singing at Western for a very long time, and he's like a tradition. He sings like standard songs. I recommend that you go at least one night to go watch Rick McGee. So he plays at both the Spoke and the Grad Club. So you can go see him there. And you are here to study, but have fun. Western students study hard, but they play hard also, right? It's getting that balance and finding that balance of keeping up with your school and doing that, but also taking those times to have fun. Go to dinners, go out with your friends, whatever it may be, but make sure that you are doing those social things as well. It's not just about school. So a little bit about Canadian culture. So in Canada, we often ask, how are you? We pass you by on the street and say, hey, how are you doing? And we keep walking. We don't wait for the answer. And we just expect you to say, I'm good, fine. How are you? Fine, see you later, right? We're not expecting you to tell us your story of how you're actually doing, okay? But don't be surprised, that's part of the friendly Canadian. We smile and we say hello and ask, how are you? Again, I talked about, we like to talk about the weather because it's always changing. You can have 3 different kinds of weather in one day. It can feel like winter in the morning, summer in that noon at lunchtime, and like fall and winter again at night. It can change 20 to 30 degrees in less than 24 hours. It can be raining one day, snowing the next day, and it feels like summer the next day. So you can always talk about the weather, safest topic ever. Also, Canadians with their friendships, they have circles of friends, and they keep them usually separate. So they may have like their school friends. They may be involved in a sport and they have their sports friends. They might have their work friends, but they never bring those friends together. So when you're hanging out with people and you see you've made a friend, but then you see that they're going to parties on their social media, don't feel bad about it, because it's a different group of friends that they have, okay? And they don't tend to mix them. Some other important Canadian values: Canadians value equality, being polite, being politically correct, and diplomacy, right? We are very individual. We like personal space, about this much space between one person and the other. So if you start asking people personal information, like where do you live specifically, like what street, they won't talk about that. They won't invite you to their homes right away, right? They're very private. You don't ask about how much money do you make at work. You don't ask about those personal things. They stay away from that unless you're very, very close. They like direct communication, especially if you're going to an office and asking for something. They don't want to know your whole story. They just want you to ask, what is it that you need from me? Okay. And who has heard about, and this is for graduate students, I wanted to put this on there. Who has heard of the word sandwich criticism? Who knows what that means? Yeah. Yeah, so you kind of layer criticism or feedback, right? So they'll start with something positive and they'll say, you know, thank you for submitting your paper. And then they'll give you some criticism. And then they'll say, but you're doing really great. And so you leave and you say, oh, I'm doing great. You know, PhD students, you're talking to your supervisor and you think you're on your roll with your research and your writing, and you're like, things are going great. I'm progressing fine. They're telling me I'm doing good because they've ended on a positive note. What they want you to hear is the middle parts where they're actually criticizing you and giving you feedback. That's what you want to pay attention to. Tipping: if you go to a restaurant or if you're in a taxi, hairdresser, barbers, you are expected to give a tip of 15 to 20% of the total amount of your bill, especially restaurants. So never leave a restaurant without giving a tip, okay? That's expected here in Canada. If somebody invites you for something, RSVPing, telling them whether you're coming or not. Don't just nod and say, yeah, but you're really not going to show up. They don't like that. If you say you're going to meet up somewhere and you don't show up because you're saving face, that doesn't work here in Canada. If you're not going to show up, just say, I can't come. And showing up on time depends on the situation. You're expected to show up on time for classes, for appointments, for interviews, for dinners. But if you're hanging out with friends, that can vary. Then you get the fashionably late. You don't go to a party right at 9 p.m. You might show up at 10, right? So it depends on the situation. When you go to somebody's home, you take off your shoes. I know that's common in many other countries, but in other countries, it's not. I always argue with my family when they come to visit because they just walk into my house with their shoes. I'm like, nope, take them off. So in Canada, you always take off your shoes when you come into the house. A lot of people might have indoor shoes. So for graduate students in their offices, they might keep a pair of shoes, indoor shoes that are clean to walk around inside. If you have children in schools, they're expected to have indoor shoes for school. Opening the door for others. Have you noticed that? People will wait for you. They see you and they'll, so opening the doors for others. And again, it's considered impolite to ask personal questions. Canadian winter, I talked a little bit about the weather. Many of you are experiencing winter for the very first time. It's been mild so far, except for the week before Christmas where we had a little bit of a drop and intense weather there. But it can get as low as -30. If it does, it lasts maybe a week, not to scare you. But what's important when you're looking at the weather is to look for what's called wind chill factor. That tells you how it actually feels. That's important because it may be 0 degrees, but because it's windy, it might feel like -15. That's a big difference. So always look at the weather before you leave the house. The sunniest, most beautiful day outside, don't be fooled, that will likely be the coldest day. Okay? When it's sunny, a lot of the times it's the coldest. So always check the weather before you leave the house. And like I said, it could be sunny in the morning and have a major snowstorm at night. So it can change also. As far as winter clothing, make sure that you always cover your head, your ears, your hands, and your feet. That's where you lose your most heat in your body. That's also where you can get frostbite the fastest. So you want to make sure that you're covering your ears, your hands, and your feet. Wearing waterproof boots. Make sure your jacket is waterproof and windproof. In London, it gets very windy a lot. So making sure you're protecting yourself from the wind. Wear layers because you'll notice in some buildings, the classrooms are really, really hot. In others, it might be a little cold. It's cold outside, so you want to be able to switch up. When you're walking on the ice, you might feel like the best way to walk is kind of like a penguin when you're walking so that you don't slip and fall. And my advice to everybody is have fun with the winter. I know it's scary, I know it's cold, I know it's long, but if you find ways to have fun with it, you'll enjoy it a lot more. So get out, build a snowman, maybe try skiing or snowboarding if you've never done that, or go sledding down a hill, have a snowball fight with some friends, have fun with the snow, or sit inside and snuggle and grab a hot cup of hot chocolate. But try and find ways to enjoy the snow. Go for walks, take pictures, and enjoy that experience. Adjusting to a new culture is a process. And don't be afraid to step out of your comfort zone and encourage others to do so. If they're anxious about doing something, encourage them to get out and try something new, trying new foods, trying new things. And then the last stage is the adjustment stage where Canada starts to feel like home. You can navigate things a lot more easily. You know where things are. You understand the customs a little bit more and things are a lot easier. And then you kind of go through the same thing when you go back home, right? Because you've changed, you've grown, you've learned new things. And you got used to how things are done here, that when you go back home, you go through some of that culture shock again. Happens to me every time I go home.